sit back in your seats, get something to eat, and watch this movie. Don't let the kiddies see it, because, well, we'll let you hear the beginning first. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Left of the Projector. I am your host, Evan, back again with another film discussion from the left. Before we get into this week's discussion, I have a couple new announcements to make. The first, I have launched a Ko-Fi site where you can subscribe to the podcast or make a donation to help cover the costs of the show. You can check it out at ko-fi.com/leftoftheprojector. As well, you can also follow the show on Instagram, TikTok, as well as YouTube at Left of the Projector Pod. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. All right, we will jump right into the conversation this week on the cult classic Hackers with Serra Despair. Thank you for joining me.
Well, hello, darlings. How are you tonight, Evan?
I'm doing pretty well. But yeah, so as I mentioned, we are talking about the movie Hackers, and anyone who hasn't seen this movie, I implore you to do so. It is available on numerous streaming applications at any subscription required. This movie came out in 1995, so maybe the golden era of hacking movies. There are a few that came out around that time. Do you have, fond memories of this movie, even from when you saw it when you were younger?
Oh, of course I did. I was into the bone freaking subculture before this movie came out already. So I was very excited to see this movie coming out.
Yes. I was about 13 or so as I date myself slightly. So I was, I feel like it was the kind of movie. I don't think I saw it in the theater, but I believe I remember renting it on VHS at, the local video store, as, we used to do once upon a time. But this movie is like steeped in this 90s culture, and also sort of like this 90s, as you mentioned, kind of surface level of hacking, as opposed to, I feel like a movie deeply into hacking would be kind of boring. But this movie is not boring.
Well, yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, you're going to struggle with portraying anything computer related as interesting because, in real life, it's just lines of text and a lot of waiting for code to compile, But what you need is a movie that you can actually convince people to watch. So you have to, sacrifice and make things a little more colorful, I guess.
Yes, they definitely didn't go light on the, visually interesting kind of backgrounds of the hacking parts. And one of the very, very first scenes of this movie, as we'll kind of get through the plot as we talk about it. But one thing I was thinking about is, before Dade, one of the main characters in this film, is arrested as a young child for his hacking, which we'll discuss, in depth. But one of the first visuals is him moving to New York from, presumably, they don't say, somewhere on the West Coast, I think.
It's somewhere.
And they show the kind of the overhead shot of New York City. And then they also show the kind of overhead, quote unquote, shot of the inside of a computer. And I couldn't help but sort of feel that same visual view of the city, you're like a little ant in the city and a little dot inside the computer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. I love that so much. And I dug into it a little bit. That's actually a series of miniatures they use to show some of the bigger computer effects.
Oh,
I think that even applies to the City of Text, or which one? The one when they're inside the Gibson with the tall plexiglass towers. I believe that is also a miniature.
Oh, but it's so cool looking.
It really is. It really is. It's campy, but it's thought out campy as opposed to half-assed campy.
Yes. I mean, there's, like you said, there's only so many ways you can depict, computer type action. And so all the sort of funny sounds of the whooshing when inside the Gibson, which we'll get into later. But I think we should start with the very first scene of this movie where I mentioned Dade is arrested for hacking 1,507 computers as I think he's 11 when he does this, and he's arrested. And it's very, I would say, dark.
Yeah, they're really aggressive with this kid. All over, 7% of a stock market in a day?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
I feel like, oh, go ahead.
For an 11-year-old kid, it's kind of astonishing.
Oh yeah, it's like he murdered somebody with the amount of disdain they're putting into this poor kid.
Yeah, there was dozens of cops swarming his house, and then they immediately cut to the court scene where he's being tried it's almost like he's being tried as an adult, even though he's this 11-year-old kid, and they're basically going through his charges, and they are treating it like he literally killed someone. And in this case, as you know, this podcast is looking at films, from a leftist perspective, is they're so upset by this, not because he hacked some computers. It's because he went after Wall Street and Wall Street sank. So he went after the money of the big, capitalists and so on.
Exactly. They're so mad because he went after the money. And it's like, I guess to a certain extent, if you're trying to scare kids about it, you need to portray it that way. But viewed as just a film, that seems baffling.
Right. So if he was caught, committing espionage or some other thing of another country, they probably, he would still get punishment. But I feel like they're making an example. He can't even, the punishment is he can't use a computer until he's 18, can't even use a touchtone phone, which also strange, to people out there. The idea of a touchtone phone is also quite foreign to some people, but that's the setup. Yeah.
Sentence you to probation, under which you are forbidden to own or operate a computer or touchtone telephone until the day of your 18th birthday.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, back in the day, you could do a hell of a lot with touchtone phones. Some of the things they describe in this movie are fairly accurate. You can in fact play back a recording of coins being dropped in payphones to fool them in the time that this movie was released.
Right, yeah, people don't remember the idea. Yeah, you could use a quarter to make a phone call, but if you wanted to make long distance or other types of calls, it was expensive.
Yeah, that's right. That is kind of, long distance hasn't even existed in ages. But yeah, you could easily drop $10-20 calling the Midwest.
Yeah, but this is a great setup to the movie. And the next thing you see, as I mentioned, sort of this overhead intro to the movie. And now we're in New York, where Dade now lives with just his mom in a tiny apartment on, I believe it's in the East Village of Manhattan. And so we get to the point now where, he's a senior in high school. He's now just turned 18. He can now use computers again. And he wastes no time, getting into back to his old ways. Maybe not hacking and taking down Wall Street, but he's doing his more, you could say, personal hacking, things just to make him happy.
Yeah, oh gosh, that's a really good. This is more of a selfish thing for him, using his hacking prowess. Though it does lead us into his first encounter with any local hackers, which, this is where we meet Acid Burn, I believe, the first time. Is that correct?
Correct. Right. So yeah, the scene that we're referring to is he's now hacked into a local TV station to be able to watch what he wants. Back in the old days, things weren't digital like they were, referring to VHSs. So some computer would take a tape off a shelf and stick it into the VCR, and it would shoot you the rerun of whatever show you wanted, Gunsmoke, MASH, whatever. In this case, it was some conservative, right-wing kind of person. And this kind of gives us our first sort of inkling into the characters of some of the people in this movie. And the other one you mentioned, which is Acid Burn, who was played by a very young Angelina Jolie in this movie, is Kate. And she, we'll learn in a bit, is, quite a wealthy person. But it's interesting, this little note into her of watching this reactionary conservative on TV. By choice.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't ever give us any indication that he tripped off any kind of censor. So, the way the movie portrays the action is, Dade interferes and switches it to the outer limits because, to hell with that reactionary nonsense.
Exactly.
And then she gets involved and fights back. And I'm not sure if the movie intended for that to be the case, but I mean, that's what they gave us.
Yeah. I guess that's a good point. You could, you could conceivably say that she joins. They were showing this reactionary garbage. He switches it, and then she gets mad because she wants to watch. I don't know.
Yeah,
else.
Exactly.
So that is interesting. That is interesting. That does complicate how you might view her.
It's fairly condemning of her character throughout. Or no, I'm not going to say condemning. It's like endemic of the way
Yeah.
she behaves throughout. And there's a lot of little things. Like I think these characters after the movie ultimately end up in a startup that she funds with her mom's book money.
Yes, exactly. That's what I would see. And they're going to use their computer skills, for quote unquote for good.
Mm-hmm. Except she'll be making money off of it, of course.
Right. She'll be the COO or CFO or something, and Dade will be the guy cracking the code for their things. Because the thing that I think you mentioned in a bunch of your notes before we recorded is sort of the what makes the characters so interesting, as we'll talk about some of the others in this too, primarily by their hacker names, Serial, Freak, Nikon, and then Joey, who doesn't have his own moniker. But they all are very smart. We can't go past that.
They're almost like wizards, honestly, given the way they can interact with reality as depicted by the movie. I mean, if you take the stuff we're going to get into later about Richard Gill, they thoroughly decimate his life
Yes.
in like a couple days.
Yeah, presumably quickly, and and what's amazing is, I mean, I realize, they're obviously, it's an exaggeration. Everything, it's a movie, but I still think that these kinds of things, to some extent, none of them are really so crazy. It's just that no one would bother to do them unless you were just messing with someone, which was like, it was literally a game to them, a bet, to do it.
Right, and they had exactly enough power to just inflict their bet on Richard Gill, which admittedly, fuck the cops.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he's a Fed. He's he's not he's still a Fed, but he works for
I think it's the Secret Service.
Secret Service, which is another weird thing that I went looking, being like, why is Secret Service and not the FBI? But hacking is its own thing.
Secret Service is heavily involved in hacking stuff. They raided Steve Jackson back in the day for making a game called Hacker.
Oh, God. That's interesting. Yeah, but that makes sense because the FBI has its own. It's a different kind of of crimes.
Oh yeah, but the Secret Service would be involved in this, especially at that point in time.
The kind of the through that we're in point now is, so Dade again has stepped on acid burn or Kate's turf, and now we sort of have this initial meeting of them in school, in high school. As we all know, seniors or any kind of high schoolers, there's going to be this conflict and all this. And I feel like all the high school scenes are very high schooly, for lack of a better word.
It's just, it feels like it's written by people who went to high school maybe 20 years before these characters would have ever been in a high school.
Right.
So yeah, it feels very, I don't know, what's the word? I usually use the fellow kids to describe this kind of tone.
Yes.
Oh, it's so uncomfortable. I mean, really what we've got is like 20 to 25 year olds portraying 18 to 19 year olds, but they are written like 30 to 35 year olds. It's tonally, it's very confusing. Yes.
And I think that nothing sticks out more than kind of the relationship that kind of builds between Dade and Kate. So again, Dade is
You mean the one Dade immediately inflicts on her the second he sees her?
Yes, that's true. So it's just to put add into this, I mentioned that Kate is played by Angelina Jolie. This is her first feature film, and then Dade is played by Johnny Lee Miller. And as you mentioned, they're in their mid-20s playing 17, 18-year-olds, but it's a very weird aesthetic of them playing these characters. Like, they seem old. You rarely get like an 18-year-old playing an 18-year-old, but still they feel like adults.
They do feel like adults. I almost feel like this movie would have been better set in like a college, especially for all of these sexual intention they're inflicting on high school students.
But one of the things also part of the sort of New York aesthetic, and we get into this, and this might tie into, sort of a class aspect that I wanted to also touch on, is we have Kate, who is, we learn in a little while, is fairly wealthy because her mother is a best-selling author of self-help books. And then their friend, Freak, who is one of their compatriots, is presumably pretty, working class, middle class, lives in a modest apartment, the same with Joey and Nikon. Yeah. So everyone is very, they're living in small apartments in New York City, going to a nice high school. But then you kind of have Kate's character, who doesn't really fit the mold, but still is part of this group.
No, she really doesn't. And I did a little digging into where they shot. And the high school they actually used is called Stuyvesant High School. And I'm sure somebody's going to yell at me for pronouncing that. So, but they are a fairly prestigious high school to get in. And they also have a really, God, how do I describe it? They have very generous, like, tuition assistance programs. So, like, in this particular instance, yeah, that those classes could theoretically meet at this high school. I mean, social dynamics aside, of course.
I feel like that class dynamic between Kate being somewhat wealthy, going to, a school, which was, is within her means, whereas, everyone else kind of in her friend group presumably would require some kind of assistance because.
Well, I mean, we're never really given information on what Mrs. Murphy does for a job. So,
true. That's true.
The idea of what class he is, we can only really extract from the things he has, from like the stuff in his room and the way he interacts. And like, it would be easy to assume that she has enough to get him into this high school.
Yes, and one thing we also know is that from the very first start, they're fined. As part of his punishment is they're fined $40,000, which in 1995 you're talking about, $75,000, which is, a sum of money plus their legal expenses. So presumably she moved to New York for a job, which is what happens, probably because it could afford her a higher salary and presumably a better life for her son. Exactly. So that would make sense to me.
Yeah, they never really get into what it is she does. She just only exists to support or taunt date in some way.
Yes, so as a mother would do, as my mother might do. Maybe not in the same graphic ways that she might do it, but
she kind of went at him hard in the first scene, like straight up, like, "Hey, are you sure you're straight?" Like,
yes,
ma'am, that is very weird.
Well, meanwhile, he's drinking Coke when he wakes up in the morning in the shower, which I noticed that the last time I watched it, like this, there's like, he's always drinking Coke. They're always eating like McDonald's and fast food. That's completely, really irrelevant to the movie. I think it's kind of a funny thing given that they're in, New York City, presumably a place where there's lots of food options and they're high school kids eating, what high school kids eat.
What people imagine high school kids eat,
right? I guess that's
diner
true.
Shit.
Yeah, exactly. But so we're kind of, in the hacker group, the kids. We should also talk about, I think, the other side of this movie, which I think links into the beginning, where Dade again had hacked a bunch of computers that crashed the stock market or made the stock market go down. Crash might be too much, but he does damage to capital. Now in the latter part of this movie, the way they're connected to, the whole main plot of this movie is this large corporation that does all kinds of stuff. They mostly talk about their oil container ships, but they're disrupting
Ellington Mineral, I believe the company is called.
Yes, Ellington Mineral. So, a generic kind of stand-in for some, big billion-dollar type of company. And the people we meet on their end really is the Plague, which is he's their sort of security consultant or head of security. And he himself is also kind of a self-described hacker. But the way I sort of looked at him, I think this kind of plays into the class aspect a little bit, is that he is sort of what you might call sort of a corporate sellout. He was a hacker and he decided, to make money and to kind of to live. I'm not going to blame him. He went to a corporation and later we learn he's ripping them off. But presumably for the longest time, that's his life.
As we get into the movie, he is the most entitled white man they could have possibly written for this movie.
Yes.
Given the scope of the things he tries to do over, what the hell was it? Like over like 48.3 million in today's dollars, 21 point something. No, it was 21.3 in the movie and 43. I don't know.
A lot of money.
Yeah, not a surprisingly small amount of money.
Yeah, I guess given the size of the company, you're right.
Not just the size of the company, but the thing he tried to do to cover it up. It's like, well, okay. I mean, I guess that's a reasonable number, but oh my God, he almost ruined the planet.
Yeah, and that's another thing too, is that he casually admits that he's willing to let oil tankers flip over so that he can blame, some kid hackers just so he can walk away with the money. And it's interesting actually that his hacker name is the Plague, which is also kind of ironic. And just as an aside, he's played by Fisher Stevens, I think his character is very cheesy, as a lot of the characters are, but I think he played this role well.
Fisher knew what kind of character he was supposed to play, and he took it. He took it and he ran with it, and I can't hate his performance.
No. But so that's the kind of the two sides of this piece is, the plague whose real name I believe is Eugene. I don't think they ever share his last name. One of the hackers, Joey, who's sort of like the underling, he's kind of just learning. He, wants to prove to his friends that he's an elite hacker. That's another word they use in this movie as, elite to show, elite. Which I think it's a fitting description given their capabilities, which we'll talk about. But, so he accidentally, gets caught hacking into this Ellingson Minerals Gibson computer, and which kind of leads us along the trail of now he finds enough information about the plague's plan that he now has to frame them so that he can still get away.
And before we get too far into it, I need to point out the ludicrous nature of this premise. A super talented hacker who managed to sell out to a big corporation and is capable of writing a very complex worm that other hackers recognize as well crafted. And then he forgets to clear his garbage. He forgets to clear his recycle bin. I'm sorry, movie. You need to think just a little bit further than this.
Yeah. And what's also even crazier, what's even crazier, I guess that's just kind of silly. How could you do such a boneheaded thing? But also Joey, the character, somehow stumbles upon this single garbage file in what's presumably a massive, especially from the images we were talking about earlier of the way they portray the Gibson computer. It's an enormous supercomputer capable of, I don't remember what they describe it as, capable of
quantum physics.
Yeah, something like that. And so,
they specifically say it's for looking. The one they're talking about is looking for oil or something.
Right. So yes, exactly. So this computer is so complex, it's likely, takes up, a city block in Manhattan, and somehow this guy accidentally forgot to take out his little garbage file and he stumbles upon it. But here we are, and he does, and Joey finds it, and it leads them to, be part of it. And there was one thing I kind of glossed over. I think we've kind of sort of passed this, but I think it's worth mentioning.
Oh, absolutely.
So earlier in one of the high school scenes, I think this is after Dade hacks the computer system at the school so he can be in Kate's class. Also a little creepy on the side.
Very creepy.
Very creepy.
Immediately after he makes the pool leak.
Yes.
Or, sorry, no, he did that.
I think it might be after. It was like another prank he pulls kind of on her.
Oh, no, that one pays off immediately after, because he does it the day before, and then he goes back the next day, and then the pool leaks, and then he shows up in her class.
Yes, that's right. Oh, but the scene I'm referring to is so he puts himself into advanced English, honors AP, whatever you want to call it. And the thing that the scene, and this is something I never noticed until this last watching, so they're putting quotes on the board and kind of talking about them. And Kate puts one from her own mother. And then the other character in this movie, who I think is sort of like, you can maybe call sort of the comic relief, played by Matthew Lillard, who is Serial. He puts a quote on the board, which is kind of interesting, but under his quote, he puts the, anarchy symbol, which I thought was interesting. And I don't know if it was intentional, if you're not supposed to see it, if it's just kind of a little joke.
Well, if you pay attention, you see a lot of the anarchy symbols all over where the hackers are. Like the outside of Nikon's apartment has,
yes, you're right,
2 or 3 of them amongst the graffiti, which graffiti on his apartment feels a little problematic.
Yeah, yes. But yeah, I think you're right, though. I just, now that you mention it, I did remember him seeing it outside of there. And I think there isn't a lot of, politics in this movie. But I wanted to bring it up because I think it's one of the nods that you have hackers as kind of this different political, so to speak, quote, maybe in quotes, air quotes, kind of class or group that kind of they're kind of like anarchists in the sense that they are disruptors.
Yeah, they are attempting to disrupt things. I mean, they also spend a lot of time reinforcing the patriarchy, but that's 90s shit.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
they're high school kids.
Of course, they're just learning stuff, and unfortunately they're learning in America, which is a huge fucking problem. Uh, but I can't. Yeah, so I'd say in that sense it gets political.
And part of the only other sort of political piece, and I think this is probably another, I think you might have made a note to this, but I forgot to look it up. But a little bit later, when the two secret agents, that's a little too far, just kind of they're surveilling Joey after he's arrested for his hacking the Gibson, is they read one of the two cops reads this manifesto from, I think it's an actual manifesto from the early 80s, I believe.
You wage wars, murder, cheat, lie to us and try to make us believe it's for our own good, yet we're the criminals. Yes, I am a criminal. My crime is that of curiosity. I am a hacker, and this is my manifesto.
I don't have all the...
Oh, yeah. I can't remember who wrote it, but yes, it is legit.
Right. And so one of the things, the quote that I wrote down, I haven't been kind of mentioning many quotes, but one thing in that manifesto was, quote, "You wage wars, murder, cheat, lie to us, and try to make us believe it's for our own good, yet we're the criminals." And I think it's a good way, a good portrayal of, sort of American imperialistic ways of, convincing us that some other people are the bad guys, and yet, America's the quote unquote good guy. And in this movie, it really is the hackers. They aren't really doing anything malicious.
No, they really don't. Like when it gets down to it, they're doing stuff that, like, it kind of feels like, have you ever seen a summer camp prank war movie? Because that's kind of the vibe of the stuff they come up with. Right.
Well, yeah, that's kind of part of that sort of that little contest between the two of them later.
Oh God, yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to just mention it because I think it encapsulates how I think I said, like, sort of like the ruling class is pushing, this American exceptionalism, where hackers, the people who expose the actual bad guys, are deemed the bad guys. And in my note, I wrote down kind of Julian Assange as sort of a footnote in there as exposing American crimes, and yet he is the criminal.
Oh yeah, that sort of thing is prevalent throughout this movie too, and I do kind of like it. I feel like maybe they could have done a little work on the background because the interior politics of the movie are really problematic.
Yeah, it's kind of like they wanted to make some level of a statement in parts of it, but it kind of conflicts. I think you were saying kind of conflicts with their other politics of the movie on a more general sense.
Well, one of the things I really feel about this movie is that there was a lot of executive interference with this movie because, like I say, it's a lot of older people writing about an experience they don't necessarily have, but can research and sort of make into a story.
I'm always interested. I sometimes I look this up and I'm not always able to find like early drafts of scripts because they don't always release them because they probably don't want people to see the original drafts. And
no, you don't. In a lot of them, they're usually pretty bad.
Right. But it'd be interesting to see how some of the aspects of this movie were changed. And this is getting more into the casting. And I know we talked about kind of the ageist instance. Do you think that any of these characters were written into this movie? The actors were, like they write a role for a specific actor. Do you think that was in play here, or they picked the actors after the fact?
I kind of feel like Marco, the simpering. God, I don't even know how to say this without being offensive, but like she's totally wrote and just be baffled by everything and then yell at Eugene.
Yes.
And I feel like she was inserted maybe somewhere later in the production process. Like, wait, hold on. We need a woman to come and be absolutely ignorant about everything. And so they just cut her in at the last minute.
Yeah, her scenes are very, those are like the cheesiest lines I feel like in the entire movie are all of her lines.
Like everything about her being involved in this movie is entirely tangential. Like the first thing you see is she has the worst makeup. And I have looked at pictures of this woman. She is much hotter than that now. So like, it feels like they just sort of threw it on her and then pushed her in front of the camera. It looks bad. Her lines are terrible, and she kind of just vanishes in the third act, and that's it.
That's true. They kind of had her, be this sort of accomplice to Eugene or the plague. But other than that, she's kind of, similar to the mother. I mean, really the only female character in this movie that has any role is Kate. And, she's one of the main actors in the movie. Mm-hmm. But it's really a very, I think you mentioned kind of they have problematic portrayals of patriarchy. I think that kind of plays into it, the way they made her character be kind of a dunce.
Yeah, oh, that's definitely problematic. And like, you need somebody there to ask an obvious question, especially if you're trying to explain like some of the things they tried to explain to her in the final scene, or the Gibson takedown scene. But then they went and wrote her like a clown.
But I think that also this might play into, I think we should kind of maybe talk about Agent Gill, who's sort of the head cop or Secret Service agent in charge. And so he's constantly involved. You know, I think that he mentions that he once had guarded the president. Now he's stuck doing this. And when they arrest one of the people, he asked the kind of the younger cop to explain it to him in English, or, you know, so he can understand. And I think it's the dynamic of all the people at the boardroom when they're doing the security. All the old people, except for the Plague, are kind of computer illiterate, for lack of a better word. Whereas, you know, the Plague is a knowledgeable person. And so it's easy to kind of convince them and trick them into going after the kids.
Well, I mean, the way this movie portrays the world, especially when it relates to regular non-wizard humans and technology, is everybody just seems baffled by it. I mean, even from the beginning of the movie, when he's social engineering the security guard to get the call-in number for the modem, like, it just straight up like, oh, hey, do you know anything about computing? No? All right. Here's a bunch of nonsense.
And he calls himself Eddie Vedder.
Yes. I forgot about that. But yeah, like, the whole movie portrays like the rank and file as these kind of numpties who are just forced to manage technology to make our main characters look like wizards.
But I mean, is it so far off when I think back to the kind of the early 90s, mid 90s, and the beginning of using of computers for more things? I mean, I'm thinking back to like my dad not really having, you know, being very good with computers because they're being introduced to them at such an older age. Whereas, you know, this kid, Dade, you know, he's a computer at age 11. Obviously, he's also very intelligent and he's able to do things that, you know, the average person couldn't. But I think there's also that age divide of, you know, computers being like fair. The young person's game.
I know, but I feel like that's how the movie feels about it.
Yeah.
I feel like the movie is ultimately coming from a perspective, well, I don't understand computers, so they're just wizardry. You know?
You're right. Like, I could show you could show your parent how to do something super simple, and like they think you're a wizard when literally you're like, I just pressed 3 buttons. I just reset your modem.
Whereas, you know, in reality, there have always been a lot of people interested in computing who actually do know what's going on. It's just in this movie, I don't know, for some reason they need to power down regular people to make our otherwise normal characters seem stronger.
You know, if everyone was a equal on sort of the same playing field, it's sort of the same idea of, you know, Marvel or other superhero movies, that their abilities seem so much greater versus just kind of an average Joe person. So it does make that, what's the word, sort of the differentiate, the difference between them is so great. But yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was totally agree with you. And there was something else I was going to go for right there. I forgot it. It's all right. I'll come back later.
Yeah. Well, so I was just bringing up Richard Gere, as I mentioned, is the head cop. And so he is, you know, in charge of the Secret Service group that's, you know, involved. He's played by Wendell Pierce. I'm sure you've seen him in numerous, you know, things here and there. But his character is very interesting. And one of the scenes we alluded to earlier, which I think is kind of shows how superhuman, you know, maybe the hackers are, and it's kind of slightly irrelevant to the plot, but a pretty fun scene towards the middle of the movie is that Kate and Dade are having, you know, an argument who's more elite, and so they decide to have a contest who can fuck with Richard Gere more and make his life hell because he's arrested their friends. So they go on this sort of really fun montage scene, which is super hilarious. Like, they're top of the Empire State Building, and the music is hilarious. Everything, but it's such a great scene.
I will not fault the movie for its soundtrack. Its soundtrack is still good. Like, for all the stuff I've said about this movie, that the soundtrack is timeless. It's so timeless that there are 3 different editions with other songs that were made later inspired by the movie.
Yeah, there's some great audio during this part, and so and I feel like the music. I'm trying to think of the time, that era, and it's sort of different music. And I think the idea in my mind, as I was just thinking about it, is music at that time, as far as like radio music, is alternative grunge kind of music. But the music in this movie is not that. It's more what you might perceive as, it's not techno, isn't the word either. I don't know how I would describe.
Electronica is a good,
Yes, that's it.
vague description. God, I want to say it's kind of trancy, but I feel like somebody's going to yell at me if I do.
It speeds up in this scene, which kind of gives you, like in any good movie will, kind of feeling of, things are happening. They're really messing with Richard Gere. They make him act like he's dead. They put personal ads. They do. What else?
I mean, the personal ads were a little problematic.
Yes,
just a little bit. I do want to comment though, because there is a little cut scene where like you see them install the personal ad, and then you see the effect where he's just being constantly called by a bunch of horny dudes.
Yeah,
and like it's meant to be funny, but like the dudes are just a little too creepy. It's like one of those subtle things. I feel there's one guy right at the end, like the third one, and it's a perfect beat because the dude just comes in and he's like, "That's why they call me the Stallion," and I'm like, "I want to know why they call him the Stallion."
Yeah, and then I think the plague comes in and he hears this and he's like, "Oh, you dirty dog," or something like that too.
Yeah.
Oh, and he probably has no idea what's going on, except that probably they're messing with him and he doesn't really care.
Well, he has no idea. He's totally disinterested in what's happening to Richard. Richard, for the plague, is just the state instrument for him to use to inflict harm on these kids.
Exactly.
Get out of his thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that made me think of a line. I know it's kind of out of place, but one of the things that the plague tells to Dade when Dade threatens him later, he says, there's worse things than death, and I can do all of them. And it's kind of true because he controls or has access to police who can put you in jail. He can ruin your life in other ways. So it's almost worse because the idea is that you will have to suffer these consequences versus just being gone.
I don't know how realistic the threat he made is. I don't think it could happen, but I don't think it would stay that way for very long. But god damn. Like the idea that somebody could do it is pretty intimidating. Yeah,
well, and the fact that and this is the kind of what leads to it is that the plague threatens Dade's mother by saying he can change her record, send her to jail, and then change it back, and she kind of disappears. But to be able to do that, they talk about their hacking, like, oh, there's this FBI database, and I just hacked into it. Like it's like they just like turn on a light switch and like boom, they're inside of this supercomputer.
Hold on, let me just log into the FBI. Tap to tap tap, done.
Right, and they're not caught. What's funny is they can somehow do all those other things meticulously without getting caught, and yet. I guess the idea is that Joey wasn't very good at what he was doing, and so he gets caught. Whereas if the other people had hacked the Gibson, they might have gotten away with it, I guess.
Well, the thing is like he tells the bank story at the beginning where he makes an ATM to spit money out.
Right.
Never pays out. He gets in trouble. He gets busted, not for the very big federal crime he did, but the little thing where he stole garbage from somebody who happened to be trying to do something sinister. He just got unlucky as hell. But like in every other regards, he's portrayed as like a newbie. He's a newbie hacker for the majority of the movie. And then the thing where immediately the scene after where he talks to them goes, "You guys never tell me to do anything." He does exactly what they tell him to do.
What's interesting too is the people who do get arrested. I know later in the movie, I think they all do, but initially Joey gets arrested. They also arrest Freak. And both of whom, maybe I'm wrong. Both are not white. I mean, definitely Freak is not, but I don't know about Joey. And I was just thinking that they kind of target the.
Well, no, they.
I could be wrong here on this one. As an actor, I think he's just a white guy, but I don't know.
I think he's just like the dork character. Like he's just like a typical dork. Let me see. Oh, Jesse Bradford is the person who played Joey and was 16 throughout that movie.
That theory could be out the window.
It is important that like we only see the supporting characters catching flack up until
That's true, right.
The end. There's a lot of little subtle things in this movie. Like if we can go back to the chalkboard scene where they're writing up the quotes.
Yeah.
There we have cereal, we have acid burn, we have we've got Kate, we've got the fucking Dade, we've got cereal, and a random black student, random black girl right in the middle. Now, and I'm not trying to call anybody. I don't think anybody actively did this, but if you notice, how much board space did she get?
They don't like. I don't even think you can see her quote.
She doesn't get to finish her quote throughout the movie. No. In fact, as soon as Kate Libby's done, she stops writing, which is weird in and of itself. But she's getting like less than a fourth. Like Kate is taking up the most space
with her mom's
on the board. Yeah, with her mom's quote, and then we have Dade taking up the next amount with his. I can't remember who he quoted, and then we've got fucking cereal all the way over taking up a little more space than necessary, but she's framed in this very narrow space. And I think like that kind of tells you how God, I don't even know what I'm trying to say, because I noticed it and I was like, oh, that's some subtle racism. That's what telling me to pay attention to. And like, I don't think anybody meant it, but like seeing that frame, I was like,
I think it's kind of like inherent in movies probably throughout
especially
that
at the
period,
time. This really tells you when this movie was shot and what people felt.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a good point, because they definitely kind of cast the main character is sort of a rich white girl, and the other main character is, again, we don't know exactly his financial situation, but again, sort of a somewhat
a comfortable white man.
Yeah. Comfortable white man. Exactly. And so they don't really, I think that when they get arrested in the last scene, I think they do handcuff them, but when they're in the office, they're just kind of like free walking around. They don't really, they don't get the walk of shame through the prison like Freak and Joey do.
No. Oh my God. I didn't even notice that. Good catch.
I don't know if they do Joey. I know they do Freak, where they he walks through, he gets the phone call and does one of his little phone wizardy tricks, which I'm sure you noticed as well.
Yeah, that actually works. That hook, the hang up signal they used to use, that was also the tone they used for rotary phones to dial out. So what he did was just dial 0 on a touch tone phone using a rotary hack.
But so we're kind of at the I would say sort of like in the second to third act of this movie, all the characters are now being framed. They're slowly getting picked off one by one and going to prison or getting arrested anyway. And we do have a couple other scenes kind of before there that I know you made mention of, one of which being the party scene at Kate's house. And I have a couple thoughts about it, maybe in a different sense. My thoughts on that scene are more of the fact that it kind of shows her, it's a very large apartment with a huge balcony, multiple balconies. Her bedroom is enormous. And then you think of Dade's bedroom, it's like a closet. So that was how I saw that scene, but you had some other thoughts I thought you should share.
I have a whole bunch of thoughts, but for that kind of apartment, especially New York, that's owned real estate. They bought that and are maintaining it. So they have a lot if they are able to buy something even slightly elevated.
Yeah. And that's a multi-million-dollar home easily.
Yeah, it has to be. It absolutely has to be. One of the things I thought was funny. This is when Kate's boyfriend just disappears. He just disappears from the movie.
Right. He's like, oh, you're going to go into that hacker shit. And then he's gone.
He leaves her life forever at that point. And I thought that was like, okay, I'm not used to seeing that happen to dudes. And it's pretty funny. Like he's an obstacle and he just eliminates himself.
My favorite thing earlier in the movie in the other scene is when Dade asks his name is Travis, which I think is also like the perfect name in my head. Like he's a Travis of something. I don't know. And he's like, oh, what does he do? He's like, you're looking at him. He just looks good. So he may not even go to the high school. I perceived him like as a college kid, like at NYU or something.
Yeah. That's the thing. You didn't see him in the school. You didn't really see much of him anyway. He was mostly just a theoretical boyfriend.
Yeah, right. He was just kind of you said like the obstacle that had to be eliminated for Dade to come into the picture.
Yeah, for Dade to come in and claim his woman prize for successfully completing the movie.
Yeah, and I think you also the scene, the party there too. I mentioned briefly earlier is the cop. Yes. The cop also infiltrates it, who doesn't seem to really do anything. I don't know what he expected to find, but
he's getting super comfy dancing with high schoolers, which is definitely not
very creepy.
his The whole thing is creepy. Like this whole movie just stops to body shame two characters that don't exist, and to let everybody know, A, Lord Nikon has a photographic memory, and B, he absolutely will use it to stalk people.
One thing I noticed in the last viewing, so normally I don't watch movies with headphones, but I was watching it, I think just on my phone part of it. And in that scene, when he recites the woman's or young girl's address and phone number, and they sort of call her name, you can slightly hear it. It's not in the subtitles. It says, "How'd you know my name?"
Oh, yeah, I did hear that.
It's super subtle, but then, you know, this is kind of getting into the nitty gritty, but it's kind of creepy. Very creepy.
It is it's really unsettling the way they're like, he gets it. It's what he intends to do with the information more than he has it, you know?
Right.
Like if he just was like, oh yeah, I saw her ID on the way in. I just have a photographic memory. Done. You've told me the information. I don't need to be worried about all of the men in this cast.
Yeah, you do have to be worried too. And also, Nikon is not a high school student. He presumably is older.
Really?
Well, I mean,
okay.
Well, I guess we don't know this. We don't know this.
We did not see him at the school, so we have no idea how old he is.
And he lives in some apartment that presumably is his own, where Serial crashes regularly.
Yeah, I guess I only thought he was a high schooler because he was hanging out with high school.
That doesn't necessarily always happen that way. But I feel like, you know, the getting to, you know, sort of the final act of this movie, which I think is, you know, worth discussing, is, you know, all of the rest of the hackers that haven't been arrested, they get help from Razor and Blade, who I know we didn't mention too much, the sort of hacking TV show kind of deal. And they decide to help them where they want to basically take down the Ellenson Mineral, the Gibson, and presumably save face for the hacker community worldwide is the kind of the way I saw it. And so they decide they're going to destroy the Gibson and get the information they need to try and to expose the plague.
Yes, and they do it with so many weird screensavers.
Yeah. They're the little hacker images, or like the virus images, are all so hilarious.
That's
not how it
like,
works.
A couple of them are literally just screensavers, and I'm like, okay, points for using resources that are available, but
yeah, I wanted to see the flying toasters from like the early Windows. If you remember, I think it's like Windows 95, I think was the first screensaver, probably, right? I must think that's about right.
Yeah, I don't remember 311 having any real screensavers like that.
So and this is 95, right? So I guess it hadn't come out yet.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to go back I haven't used Windows 311 in a long time. So it might have had a screensaver. I don't know if it had words like that.
Yeah. I remember like those old screensavers that literally was like a black screen and you could type your own word and it would just kind of bounce around.
Oh,
and I always wanted to see it bounced exactly in the corner. I don't know, I'm a weirdo.
Oh yeah, they used a lot of that stuff.
But yeah, that whole scene is hilarious.
Yeah. Props to them for making something that is inherently uninteresting interesting visually.
Exactly, yeah.
If you take away all of the plot and stuff, it's just a lot of people aggressively typing.
Right. And that scene is no different. They're like all having on like their little gloves and their, you know, eye pieces. And I think I pictured in my head like someone putting on like the power glove from Nintendo.
Oh, you mean the power glove they confiscated from Joey?
Oh, do they? Is that what it was? A power glove?
Yeah, he's got like in the scene where he's like bemoaning his torn apart equipment. Yes. You've got
Lucy.
Yes, Lucy. And you've got creepy cop who I'm calling Jimmy Depp because they didn't name them.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got Jimmy Depp in there and he's just like playing around with a power glove that they painted to get off all the, you know, Nintendo stuff. But like, yeah, it's there, include the keyboard and everything. He just
I missed that. I think I know he has the glove on, but I didn't think of it as a power glove. So maybe in my head I subconsciously remembered that scene. And so the final kind of hurrah is that they take down the computer, the Gibson. They expose the virus. They expose the plague on, you know, live TV as Serial. They don't really explain how he's able to like gain access to every satellite on Earth to, or do they?
It's sort of implied. Well, I mean, if you go back, the way we're introduced to that the cast and crew watch is sort of a bonding ritual in the beginning of the It's somewhere later in the first act or near the beginning of the second act. Yeah, they get together and watch a TV show about Razor and Blade where they explain a real thing you can do to payphones. Not that it matters now. But yeah, ostensibly they are illegally broadcasting that, which is their justification for being in the story.
Got it. Okay, so that's true, and I think they do show like when they're trying to get their attention, they might be like a satellite in the background. Now that I think of it, so maybe if there are elite hackers, they could just hack the satellite, and they had all these people internationally, so they presumably could all flood something and do something hacky.
Yeah, you just throw a lot of hacking at the Gibson, just
right.
Put a lot of hacking on it.
And so this broadcasts serial like throughout TVs and everything, and he exposes Plague, as of course he has to go down at the end, for his malicious virus that could have had an ecological disaster. And in the very end, you see him getting arrested on the airplane, and you kind of see the good guys, the young high school kids all, celebrate. And then the sort of the final scene of this movie, I believe, is when Dade and Kate's character finally get together. They go on a date, and presumably they consummate their relationship.
Yeah, I'm super uncomfortable with the idea that is the final thought. 'Cause if you watch through the early credits, like it's just them floating in water doing vaguely erotic things.
Yes, it's creepy.
This is two 18-year-olds. Theoretically, ostensibly, this is two 18-year-olds. Uncomfortable. And I also do want to point out that apparently hackers are so powerful that they can control office lights in this universe. Yeah. Precisely.
Well, and right. He makes which then I don't think office lights would have been, controllable by power. It kind of gives me the vibes of the movie Fight Club when they light the fire in the various buildings. So it says something of like the Project Mayhem thing again.
Oh yeah, the smiley face.
Yes, the smiley face. But they don't do it through hacking. They just light a fire in them, which is
they just go in and do it. Like that's ostensibly. But this is like they're ostensibly controlling the electricity going to and from those rooms.
Yeah,
somewhere else without really being able to see it. Throughout this. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say is before I lose it is it possible that the reason they cast such more older characters because they couldn't really have this sort of continual sort of like love connection if they were 17, 18 years old. Well, not 17, but say just 18. Whereas being a bit older, they could get away with it.
Right, but then they didn't age up the characters commensurately. Like I said, they're 17 to 19-year-olds being written as oversexed 35-year-olds.
Yeah, that's true.
It's deeply uncomfortable with the context. This could have been college, and I've been like, all right, I can't stop nobody in college, I guess. I can feel weird about it.
I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, which maybe they don't deserve, because it's still very...
See, that's the thing. Like, it doesn't... I can't say for certainty that they're doing it specifically to accomplish any goal or what have you. I can't really say that, but unconsciously, all of the unconscious factors stacked up to say some very uncomfortable stuff throughout this movie.
It's true. I mean, and what's interesting is I don't feel like they needed that subplot necessarily.
No.
But at the same time, if they didn't have it, how do they needed to somehow create this. Presumably it could have been just another guy instead of Kate. It could have just been all dudes, and they could have had a, power struggle over it. It didn't have to be this love way.
I mean, it could have been a couple extra girls and then no romantic relationship.
True.
That too. That is a very big issue within 90s movies. Anytime a female character is introduced, they're probably going to hook up with somebody. Probably the main character, and we probably have to watch. And it's like it didn't add anything except me going, I don't really like these. I don't like these dream scenes that these kids are having. I do not.
Yeah, and they like acknowledge it later too, like to each other.
Yeah, well, I'm talking more the portrayal of the scenes and how they react. Like Dade has a perfect, oh my God, I don't want to think about this. I'm just going back to bed. But then Kate is portrayed as being really into it. And I'm like,
yes.
18, 18-year-old. That is an 18-year-old being portrayed right now. Please don't do this to me.
I know we've kind of covered the whole movie, as far as the plot and some of the pieces in it. Were there any other, whether it's specific to the plot or other notes you wanted to make sure you didn't leave on the cutting room floor?
Like I said, these characters are sort of portrayed as like being they're superheroes. I'm just going to say they're superheroes. This is a superhero heist movie. That's just what this is. But like then there's all this pressure to go to college.
Yes, that's one thing we kind of missed over is Dave's constantly being pressed by his mother to fill out his college application, and the plague is saying if you get arrested, you're not going to go to college. But if he was presumably able to hack into his high school to be in whatever class he wanted, he could just hack himself into Harvard.
Yeah, I mean, they hold on deleted a person to settle a bet. What is college going to teach them?
Yeah. Yeah, they don't need college.
They don't really need college. And yet this movie is really like, oh, you better not get in trouble or you won't get to go get an embarrassing amount of student debt.
Yeah, well, that feels very like, I think you mentioned sort of like execs wanting to insert themselves. That feels very much like we have to make sure all the young kids go to college, stay in school, don't do drugs.
Exactly. That feels like the after school special message they're trying to slide in. Like, no, don't forget to get enslaved by your debt. That's very important, children. Yeah,
they show Joey smoking cigarettes throughout this movie, but they don't. I think once during one of the party scenes, they're drinking a little bit from like a kind of a flask. But the only drug use in the movie, I know this is getting into the weeds a bit, is the plague is smoking a joint, I believe, at one scene when he's hacking the FBI. So they're kind of showing, let the older hacker who's made it can, do that kind of thing. And the young high schoolers have to go to college.
I did not catch that joint. And yes, you were right. He absolutely is smoking something hand rolled, whereas Joey, for some reason, is allowed to have it be double fisting cigarettes around his
always
friends.
The whole movie, almost every scene, and like in his own room, and somehow he's able to, like, his mom doesn't notice he's smoking in his room. It's like, okay, buddy, good try.
It's like, no, I'm sorry, that spray you made her buy does not cover half a pack. I'm sorry, your room should be yellow, man. Yeah.
Again, like another small. I mean, obviously his mother knows. He's just like, when there's always. I mean, as a kid, you're trying to hide things from your parents, and like they just know, and maybe they just don't say anything because they don't care, or it's not worth the fight. But as far as my only last kind of thoughts about the movie is, I think, in general, the movie, I mean, I really enjoy this movie. If this movie were just like, I don't have cable, but if it were to just show up when I, on TV or something, I would watch it. It's a watchable movie. It's interesting. It's campy, but enjoyable. A lot of the movies I've done so far have been that kind of style, but I think it lends itself to be a good movie, despite all the problematic things. It's not as problematic as, something like Animal House. I don't know why I thought of that one. But at the same time...
Because Animal House is problematic.
But, as far as a movie is concerned, I think it's one of its time of the mid-'90s, and, as a place, to me, just because of, how old I was when it came out. But and it does have those layers to it I think we've gotten into. But did you have any sort of last thoughts about it?
Oh yeah, I'll just sort of sum up how I feel about the movie, because if you get into the details of the movie and how it's constructed, they did real script writing. They made sure to call forward things that they were going to reveal later on. The dialogue would have been way better on actual adults, but like it's still good. There were a lot of really bizarre decisions being made, but like this is an earnest attempt at a movie, and I think that's why it's still a cult classic. Like, this could have very easily been a sarcastic $5 million waste of time. And instead, they really tried to do something, and that's why it stands out. That's why it's a cult classic, even though it's kind of bad when you watch it as an adult.
But overall, I think your points are right. I think they did make a good movie, even if it's not, a great movie. I think it does stand up.
I totally think you could, and I totally think you could remake this movie right off the chop off the romance thing, maybe straighten out the internal politics a little bit. But
college kids instead, you think?
Yeah, put in college kids, maybe make sure they're all actually politically what they're attempting to portray.
Yeah.
Spend a little more time developing the characters. And I think you could do it. I think you could easily reboot this movie now and probably do better than the original did.
Yeah. And I think if you did do it, I think you would still stick it, early computer era as opposed to trying to make it now. I don't know. Maybe I could.
No, I agree with that. I think a reboot should keep it in. It should keep it in the 90s.
Yeah, I don't think it works as a modern movie.
No, not at all. Because then you're trading out aggressively typing on keyboards to aggressively tapping tiny squares of plastic.
Exactly. I think we've done a good job on this movie. Again, thank you, Serra Despair, for joining me to talk about this campy movie. I almost said the net, but Hackers. Thank you for joining me. It's been great.
Of course.
All right.
Absolutely. A pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, again, this has been Left of the Projector. You can listen to this on your podcast network of choice, and we will catch you next week. Thank you so much.